since the establishment of the Children's Authority, which was just a little over a year ago, people now have somewhere to contact if they think or they know that a child is at risk of abuse. Now, it could be neglect, it could be sexual grooming, it could be actual sexual abuse, it could be physical beating, and so on. But the fact that people now know that society cares enough to have set up an entire institution to deal with it means that more and more cases are coming out. It's over 6,000 now that have been reported to them. Before, people didn't have anywhere to go except to a police station. And in response to your second question, very often when people went to a police station, they either were brushed off as that's not really very important, or the reports weren't taken. In some cases that were very much publicized, 2 or 3 that I can remember, a little girl was taken to the back by one of the police officers and molested in the back of the police station while her mother waited in front for whatever paperwork she was told was going to be done. People are very nervous about child sexual abuse particularly, and child goes right up to 18, don't forget, and reporting it to the police. If you call the police from home, which was what this woman did, as we all know, the police never have enough vehicles, they cannot make it right now, they don't have staff. Now, previously, we had something called a Child Protection Task Force. While the task force was going on, which I was chairing, we managed to get the Ministry of National Security to set up a special unit, which was the Child Protection Unit of the police force. It still exists, but if you call the unit for something that you suspect is going to happen, they may not be available. Don't forget, we are short on police. And the ones that are there, very often when you're looking for them, are on vacation, or they're on sick leave, or they're not available, or they don't have a car. And the administrative problems have never been sorted out. So we get to vigilante justice. In this case, I am a little bit appalled at the negative responses that the mother has received, because women have built into their DNA the need to protect their children. It's part of your physical makeup, your DNA. And what she was doing was obviously, in light of the country she lives in, the resources available to her, what she did was to take the pressure that was going to be put on her child and take it herself, or offer to take it herself. At first she did. She did it online. Now, let me just explain something going way back. The problem with taxi drivers and little girls has been going on for at least 30 years that I can remember. We didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have that kind of grooming. So it usually took place when the child was in the taxi going to school or coming back. And I have dealt with several cases of this over the years, where a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old child becomes pregnant by a taxi driver. The taxi driver rarely, if ever, offers to support the baby. That baby is taken care of by the little girl and her mother. And that destroys a child's life. It changes a child's life, so she doesn't have a chance to do the kind of education and schooling and training that she might otherwise have had. And it has just gone on for so long that one of the reasons why sexual grooming was put into the Act, when it was put into the Act, was a reflection of this as a problem. I think that the Chief Justice referred in his opening address to the law courts the need to protect our children. And really, we have not been doing a good job of this. Because
even you talk about 30 years. I know Bunji Garlin actually has a song. It's not as popular as some of it as others. That some young girls, they set out for school, but they never reach. and these are part of the problem, or this is part of the problem. But I'm wondering though, is there anything on the books as it relates to pedophilia?
Well, that is a very interesting and complicated question, because there are different kinds of child abuse. Usually, dyed-in-the-wool pedophiliacs are people who are only attracted to children. They are usually of lower intelligence. They are usually people who have been, now people who are shorter, thicker, and as I said, of lower intelligence. You know who they are because these are the ones that end up in jail. But other people who have sex with children, it may be because they were molested when they were a child, and this is what they know and what they need to get back to. With still others who want to have sex with children, it is because there is a something in their brains get crossed. In other words, we are naturally attuned to seeing a child and wanting to protect it. This is what normal people do. You see a baby and you think, oh, and you want to protect it. There are people whose synapses have been crossed in their brains, and when they've been crossed with the need to express affection through sex, which is what happens with an adult. Now, this almost never happens with women, maybe one in a couple of thousand, but it's usually something which the research has shown happens with men. And therefore, when they see this child, they are attracted to it, they want to comfort it, they want to take care of it, but then the sex thing kicks in. Now, not all people who have this problem actually do have sex with children. There are people who are aware of it, are aware that it's wrong, they're aware it's a danger, and they learn to discipline themselves, and they learn to control themselves so that they don't do it, and they don't go into the situations where they're going to be tempted. In other words, you know, running Boy Scouts troops, dealing with children's affairs and that kind of thing. It's quite an interesting, there's a very good article that appeared a few weeks ago in The Economist magazine from the UK about this, and it's worthwhile. I would recommend everybody who has to deal with children or crime or this kind of problem, get hold of a copy and read it.
The Children's Authority, you said, is about a year old.
Mm-hmm. A little over.
And people are seeing it as a way to actually call in, report cases.
Oh, they do. Mm-hmm.
What happens after cases are reported?
Well, I think that nobody was prepared for the extent to which the cases were going to come into the Children's Authority. It is as though a dam burst. And all sorts of cases. There were 5,000 cases within the first 10 months that were reported. How many more have been reported since then is probably equivalent to that. And while there is trained staff, there's not enough, because nobody expected this many cases. Now, they do have social workers, they do go investigate, they do work with the Child Protection Unit of the police, and they do try to investigate to see how many of these reports are actually in immediate danger or how many of them are suspected cases. And let me just make it clear that if you suspect that one of the children in your neighborhood is being abused or is at risk, it is still important to report it, because just to leave it means that the child may very well end up being abused or molested. Even if it has not yet happened, it means that the child is at risk, and that it is a responsibility, I really believe, of adults to at least report it. At least, remember the old saying about it takes a village to raise a child? If children don't know that there are people in the village that are watching out for them, they are much more liable to get into trouble and never report it.
And I'm wondering how much that village has actually widened with the onset of social media and those kind of media and ability for people to contact others or to have grooming take place in a manner that a parent or a guardian may not know about, because you can do it in closed doors, you can do it on a smartphone.
It's a very interesting approach because it covers both ways, doesn't it? Number one, it makes the approach easier, and number two, it makes the reporting easier. And you're quite right. I mean, we didn't have grooming on cell phones in the past, but now we do. We have grooming through the internet. And as we know from publications all over the world, the extent to which young people have been groomed to join ISIS, for example, or gangs, or to get involved with the drug trade. Because if small children are used as couriers, they're not as often caught, and they're not as often suspected of being drug couriers. So that if this can be done on the internet, and don't forget most of our children are now on the internet, the whole method of communication and extent of communication and methodology of communication has completely changed in the last 5 or 6 years, especially since all children were given computers.
What responsibility should media take in some of the things that we're seeing? And I say that because many times, as opposed to reporting on possible solutions and people who have solutions or that kind of mindset, many times we focus on what is. We see people lying on the road, on the front page of the paper, and we see things of that nature. Specifically, there is the case of a teenager whose mother was killed, and media rushed to her to get statements and whatever. But was there someone who was supposed to be with the police on that beat? But I mean, so these are some of the questions I ask, and in terms of the media saying, okay, we're culpable. Where do we put that point or draw the line?
Well, number one is such a thing as emotional intelligence and sensitivity. And you're right, to have a teenage child who has just seen her mother be killed, swamped by hundreds of media, is not sensible, it's not sensitive, and it's not really ethical. But I think that there is more that the media could do in terms of prevention. What the media tends to do, because this is what you're paid to do, is to report the sensational accidents and incidents, and it's high drama and people watch it. But if at the same time or at a different time you went into things like prevention, I think, interestingly enough, that because of this 11-year-old girl incident, the media is now beginning to focus on prevention. How do you prevent this kind of thing from happening? An 11-year-old girl doesn't know how to handle it. I can remember being 11, and I knew I didn't know how to handle that kind of thing, but it happened back then as well. And the whole push for adults and parents to be more concerned about what their children are getting on media and on the new technology, I think, is something which parents haven't been trained to do, because we didn't have it when we were that age. What we did have were the same kind of people of low intelligence, or people who had had problems themselves when they were children, trying to approach little girls, 10, 11, and 12. I can remember it happening when I was that age. And that was a long, long time ago. And it happened to my children when they were that age. And it's happened to my grandchildren when they were that age. It goes on. And I think that because we know that, it is something that we have to start doing preventative work about, and probably teaching people from the time they're in school. But of course, you know that our school system doesn't like to get into things like that, parent subject.
What are some of the other things, other ways that we can address it? Because I hear you saying that, okay, possibly we have about 10,000 reports, but at the same time, we have a figure. But we often see that, okay, there's this figure of those that are reported, And most likely that means that there's so many others that are not reported. How do we treat with that?
Well, let me take the first question first. A lot of mothers, if children come to their mothers and say that this is happening, will not report it. They will not take it to the police because if it goes into court, the child is traumatized again. And there are very clever lawyers who, in defense, will just keep postponing the case, postponing the case, postponing the case, so that the child's lawyer has to keep coming and the parents have to keep giving refreshers, which means that they are putting out a whole lot of money which they may not have. And eventually, what the intention is the children will, the parents will give up because they just can't afford it anymore. And as a result, a lot of people who do molest children go free. That is not to do with the media, that is to do with the judicial system. And as you know, there's now a move to change some of the legislation and the structure dealing with adolescent children, dealing with juveniles generally. The family court is there, but it doesn't deal with this kind of case specifically.
Yeah, the Chief Justice actually spoke to that and some of the frustration experienced and the fact that he can't change legislation, but he would like to see certain things changed, especially how children and juveniles are treated with.
Yeah, and he's right, he can't. I mean, he's not Parliament. But he can influence Parliament by doing exactly what he did, and this is by making the situation public. He doesn't have the authority to direct Cabinet as to what should go on to the agenda for Parliament, unfortunately, but he does have the power to direct the legal draftsman to have legislation prepared, and I am assuming that he has been doing this from what he's been saying.